I mean, we can still talk. Yeah? I'll give people a little bit of time before they join. Give it another 30 seconds. I'm so glad it's going to be spring tomorrow.
Yeah.
That was a lot of snow this weekend. It was fun though. There were a lot of snow forts in my neighborhood. Sure. Okay, just getting started up right now. Hello everyone, my name is Bin Ngo and I'll be your moderator for today. On behalf of the Canadian Institute for Safety, Wellness and Performance, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, where our speaker will be discussing his work on ergonomic demands and occupational requirements of skilled trades in Ontario. Before we jump in, I'd like to announce that this meeting will be recorded and transcribed. This ensures that those unable to attend can still benefit from the valuable discussions and insights that will be shared today. Additionally, in case you need the closed captioning feature, I'd like to point out that you can click the 3 dots at the top of your Teams screen and you should see an option to turn on live captions. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. As an institute at Conestoga College, we would like to acknowledge that in Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, and Brantford, we are located on the Haldimand Tract, land promised to the Haudenosaunee people of 6 nations, which includes 6 miles on either side of the Grand River. This is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples. To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on, and a way of honoring the Indigenous people who have been living and working on the land for thousands of years. Now, allow me to introduce the Institute and our speaker. CISWP is committed to making Canadian workplaces productive and sustainable by collaborating across disciplines. Our aim is to position Canada as a global leader in empowering businesses to thrive in a competitive economy. We focus on improving workforce safety, wellness, and performance through research, knowledge transfer, and workforce development. By working closely with our stakeholders, we conduct innovative research, we create evidence-based tools and services, and we address knowledge gaps in the field. Our presenter for today is Kumar Somasundram. Kumar is the laboratory manager at the Canadian Institute for Safety, Wellness and Performance. He has expertise in the operation and maintenance of field and lab instrumentation and wearable sensors, signal processing of biophysical data, and statistical analyses. He is passionate about understanding the mechanisms of musculoskeletal disorders and creating strategies to reduce risk of injuries. Now, while we've received some questions beforehand, we strongly encourage you to continue asking questions during the webinar in the Q&A section where you can ask your questions anonymously. Just be mindful, if you happen to be replying to a question, you will not be anonymous. Rest assured, these questions will be addressed either during the session or afterward, depending on the time constraints. One thing I want to note before we start, when you submit your question, it gets moderated. I get to see it first, and then I will either just ask it straight out or I'll publish it for everyone to see. It'll be one or the other. So feel free to keep putting questions in. They will be seen. Now, should people wish to continue the conversation after this webinar, I will be sharing ways to connect with the speaker in the post-webinar email, where you'll be able to reach out either via LinkedIn or via email. So please now join me in welcoming to the stage Kumar.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that this presentation is a part of a broader research initiative known as Skilled Trades Research, Innovation, and Education in Occupational Safety and Health, or otherwise known as TRIVOSH. And this is made possible by the financial support of the Ministry of Labour, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development of Ontario. The views expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect those of MLITSD or other institutions involved in this project. More than 100,000 lost time injury claims were reported in Ontario from 2015 to 2020 across the skilled trades industry. Nearly 29% of those claims were due to musculoskeletal disorders, or MSD. Risk of occupational injuries can increase due to mismatches between job demands and worker capabilities. So let's say the physical or the cognitive demand of a job is greater than what the worker is capable of. That may increase the risk of workplace injury. The growing skilled trades labor shortage also shows that it's important to ensure that workers meet the demands of their jobs so that they can stay in the workforce longer while being healthier. A job exposure matrix, or JEM, is a tool that can be used to predict workers' occupational exposures based on their job titles. JEM can be created using different methods. So one of them is expert-rated exposure assessments, or we could use direct measurement or observation of these exposures at the workplace, or self-reported exposure ratings. JEM can be used to identify mismatches between job demands and worker capabilities. We can also use job exposure matrices to understand the relationship between work-related exposures as well as work-related disease outcomes such as MSDs. The purpose of our study was to develop a large and comprehensive database of occupational requirements and ergonomic demands based on self-reported data from skilled trades workers in Ontario. We also analyzed the association between the job exposures and MSD symptoms. The findings of our study can help determine targeted interventions to reduce the risk of MSD in the skilled trades population. Now moving on to our methods. For our study, we recruited participants from the skilled trades sector using our networks such as unions, health and safety associations, employer groups from various sectors, as well as skilled trades program coordinators. In the survey, there were 4 different sections. In the first section, we asked participants to respond to different types of demographic-related questions. So questions such as their age, gender, the type of skilled trade, such as their job title or which trade they're working in. The level of role, so for example, are they a journey person or an apprentice or a supervisor? The length of their employment, as well as any type of physical or cognitive impairments if they have any. The second section focuses on questions related to the occupational requirements of their jobs. So these questions were adapted from the American Occupational Network, also known as ONET. And this is a publicly available database that describes job-specific requirements assigned by subject matter experts and workers. We adapted 4 ONET domains, so knowledge, work activities, abilities, and skills. And each of these domains consists anywhere from 8 to 14 different types of descriptors. So in this slide is a sample domain and descriptor that was taken directly from the survey. So work activities is one of the 4 domains, and one of the descriptors under work activities is performing general physical activities. In each descriptor, participants have to respond to a 2-part question. The first question asks participant on how important is that descriptor to performing their current job. And participants have to respond using a 5-point Likert scale. So it goes from anywhere from not important to a score of 5, which is extremely important. Following that, the second part to that question asks the participant on what's the level of the descriptor that's required to perform their current job. So this is a 7-point scale, and it goes from 1 to 7, and there are anchored descriptions for 3 of the ratings in the scale. So in every question, there will be a description for the ratings of 2, 4, and 6. So in this descriptor example, a rating of 2 represents walking between workstations in a small office. A rating of 4 is painting the outside of a house. And a rating of 6 refers to climbing up and down poles to install electricity. And this is specific to this descriptor known as performing general physical activities. The third section asks questions related to ergonomic demands. So there were 35 questions which were adapted from the Washington State Ergonomics Checklist. Participants rated the frequency for each of the 35 ergonomic demands for their typical work shift. And these questions incorporated dimensions of posture, force, and time. So these are the sample questions from the survey. So each row represents the different ergonomic demand questions. So one of the questions at the top is, do you flex or extend at the elbow repeatedly or to hold against resistance? And participants have to respond on a 5-point scale, so anywhere from never to always or nearly always. And the middle ratings are rarely, which represents less than 2 hours per shift. The rating of sometimes, which represents 2 to 4 hours per shift, and the rating of often, which represents 4 to 8 hours per shift. The fourth and the final section of the survey refers to MSD symptoms. So in this section, we asked participants regarding the level of pain that they were experiencing in different body parts. And there were 6 body parts that we focused on. It was the neck, shoulders, elbow or forearm, hand, wrist or fingers, the lower back, as well as the knee or the leg. And these questions were adapted from the Nordic Musculoskeletal Questionnaire. Participants responded to the frequency of pain within the last 12 months, which represents the chronic pain that they were experiencing. And they also answered questions related to the severity of pain within the last 7 days, which represents the current pain that they were experiencing in each of the 6 body parts. So this slide shows the questions related to the frequency of pain or the chronic pain. And for each body part, they had an option to pick anywhere from less than 24 hours to ongoing or permanent. For questions related to severity of pain within the last 7 days, they had to pick a score from a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being no pain or soreness, 10 being worst pain imaginable. Now moving on to the analysis, the first question in the survey required participants to choose their skill trait from a list of 20 different options. And we assigned an NOC code to each of the skill trait. And to those of you who don't know, NOC refers to the National Occupation Classification Code, which is a standardized system that's used to describe and categorize occupations in Canada. If the participants belong in a job that's not in the list of 20 options that we provided, participants can actually write their actual job title, and then we would then later assign that job title to the appropriate NOC code. And this technique allowed us to group similar job titles together within the same NOC code. In order to assist in the NOC code assignment, we used an auto-assignment tool that was created by us to link job titles to NOC codes. And if necessary, we would also manually assign the job titles to NOC code wherever it's required. And to do this, we would refer to the NOC website itself. Some NOC codes may include multiple job titles. Therefore, the ergonomic demands and the occupational requirements of the underlying job titles within that NOC might be identical to each other. For the questions related to occupational requirements, we standardized the responses to a scale from 0 to 100. So, like each descriptor had a two-part question. The first part is on a 5-point scale, and then the second part is on a 7-point scale. Both of those we converted to a scale of 0 to 100, and this was done according to the guidelines of ONET to help interpret the ordinal scale for these questions. We then used the median score of the level scale for each ONET descriptor as the estimate within each NOC code. For the ergonomic demand questions, we recoded the ratings to a time-based value using the median value of the time interval that was presented in the scale. So this table here shows how we converted each of the ratings to a time-based value. So for a rating of never or nearly never, we chose a value of 5 minutes. For the rating of rarely, which is less than 2 hours per shift, we chose 1 hour or 60 minutes. For the rating of sometimes, so anywhere from 2 to 3 hours per shift, we picked the middle value, which is 3 hours, so that is 180 minutes. For the rating of often, it's 4 to 8 hours per shift, so the median of that would be 6, so that's 360 minutes. And finally, the rating of always or nearly always, we chose a value of 480 minutes, which equates to 8 hours. And we did this according to previous literature and also to help interpret the ergonomic demand scales. We also created links between each ergonomic demand as well as body parts that are most relevant in developing MSD-related pain. We then graded the expected strength of that relationship. So we would assign either it's a strong relationship, or so that's a score of 3 or a strength of 3. And then there is some relationship, which is a score of 2, and then finally possible relationship, which has a strength of 1. So for example, standing is one of the ergonomic demand that was presented in the survey. And we as a research group decided that standing can result in pain in the lower back as well as the knee or the leg. So those are the two body parts that we decided are most relevant in developing MSD-related pain due to standing. And we also assigned a strength of relationship. So we believe that there is a strong relationship between lower back pain and standing. And then we assign a value of 2. So that's some relationship between knee or leg pain and standing. And we use this information to remove ergonomic demand ratings of symptomatic participants for each ergonomic demand and body part link in order to avoid symptomatic reporting bias in our data set. So now moving on to our results. We analyzed 738 participants across 65 different NOC codes. So 15% of our participants are construction trades helpers and laborers, 13% are electricians, and 6% were landscape and horticulture technicians and specialists, tool and die makers, truck and bus technicians. And about 48% of our participants belong in different NOC codes, so about 60 NOC codes comprised of about 5% or less of the participants that we had. And majority of them had 1% of our participants. So I grouped all of them as other category for easy visualization. 14% of our participants were females and the rest were males. 64% were aged 35 years or below. 50% of our participants were journey person or apprentice. 60% worked for less than 5 years. 4% of our participants had some type of physical or cognitive impairments. 3% identified as indigenous, and 13% were identified as a member of a visible minority in Canada. So this heat map shows the results of the knowledge domain in the occupational requirements section. So the vertical axis on the heat map shows the different job titles, and the horizontal axis are the different descriptors related to the knowledge domain. And the colors represent the median score. So the darker colors represent higher scores related to that descriptor. The red tile that one of the boxes is outlined with a red box. So that just represents that for general machinists had less than 10 valid responses for that particular descriptor, so which is administration and management. So there are different ways to interpret this heat map. So we could compare across the trades for one of the descriptors. So if you were to focus on, let's say, building and construction, right? We can see that carpenters and construction managers require a higher level of building and construction knowledge compared to any other trades. We could also interpret this heat map by looking at one particular trade, but looking at it across all the descriptors. So for tool and die maker, we can see that they require a higher level of design knowledge more than any other types of knowledge descriptors. Now, in our analysis, we only presented 13 job titles because I understand I mentioned there were 65 NOC job codes, and that's because the 13 job titles presented here had 10 or more valid responses for each of the questions that were asked. And this slide presents the results for the work activities domain. So here we can see that for one of the descriptors, so handling and moving objects, electric and power line cable worker require a higher level of that particular work activity compared to any other types of trades. And moving on, there's a similar idea too, but this is for the abilities heat map. So across all the descriptors, we can see that for carpenters, they require, carpenters and electric power line cable worker, they require a higher level of static strength compared to other trades that we collected from. And finally, for the skills domain, across all the descriptors, they're pretty similar in terms of their scores. So they range anywhere from 64 to 71. For health and safety inspectors, we can see that there wasn't any type of repairing type of skills that was required. However, they needed high level in terms of active learning, critical thinking, judgment and decision making, and so on. Now this slide shows the ergonomic demands results that we analyzed from. So again, the vertical axis are all the different types of job titles, and the horizontal axis represents all the different types of ergonomic demands that we asked in the survey. And again, the red boxes represent responses that had 10 or fewer participants. So overall, we can see that across all these job titles, standing is one of the main ergonomic demands. They need to stand anywhere from 6 to 8 hours approximately within a work shift. We can also see that most trades require the workers to handle or manipulate objects that weigh at least 1 kilo. And for trades such as electric power line and cable workers, as well as electricians, they require a higher level of keeping their arms at an abducted position compared to any other trades. And we can also see that for truck and bus technicians, one of their main ergonomic demands is that they have to continuously grasp or squeeze objects, as well as for automotive service technicians as well. And this is an example where I mentioned where the underlying trades of the same NOC code will have the same results. So in this case, automotive service technician and truck and bus technician belong in the same NOC code. Therefore, the results you see in terms of ergonomic demands as well as the occupational requirements will be identical to each other. So moving on to results related to chronic pain. So in terms of neck pain, we see that majority of the participants experience some level of pain. So trades such as automotive service technicians, truck and bus technicians, as well as carpenters experience chronic neck pain for 30 or more days. And the graph on the right shows the level of chronic shoulder pain. And in there, we can see that trades such as carpenters, automotive service technicians, heavy-duty equipment mechanic, as well as landscape and horticulture technicians experience chronic shoulder pain more than 30 days. And in this slide shows the chronic pain for the other two body parts, so elbow and forearm, as well as the hand, wrist, and finger on the right side. So for elbow and forearm, we see that carpenters, as well as heavy-duty equipment mechanic, represent a large proportion in terms of the frequency of pain, so more than 30 or more days. For hand pain, we see that automotive service technicians, heavy-duty equipment mechanic, as well as landscape and horticulture technicians experience chronic pain in that body part for more than 30 days as well. For lower back and knee or leg pain, similar trades experience high levels of pain. So automotive service technicians, heating, refrigeration, and air conditioning mechanic experience a lot of lower back pain. Whereas for knee or leg pain, we see that trades such as carpenters, truck and bus technicians, general machinists all experience pain for more than 30 days. Now, using these job exposure matrices, we then analyze the associations between ergonomic demands and MSD symptoms, such as bodily pain. To do this, we integrated two different data sets. So the first data set refers to the JEM that was created in this study. The second data set is the bodily pain scores that was obtained from over 1,000 apprentices across 13 NOC job codes. And this data set I will refer to as the apprentice data set. This was collected as part of another survey from our institute where we looked at the perceptions of health and safety training for skilled trades apprentices. And one of the sections in that survey asked them about the level of pain that they were experiencing in each of the 6 body parts. So same type of questions as the chronic pain section that you saw in the survey. So using the apprentice data set, we assigned a case and non-case status for each body part for each participant based on their pain score. So a participant would be considered a case in that specific body part if they experience chronic pain for more than 30 days. We then assigned the ergonomic demand estimates based on their NOC from the job exposure matrix that we created. And using this combined data set, we then created Poisson regression models that was adjusted for age and gender to analyze the association between ergonomic demands and bodily pain. And using these models, we were then able to compute prevalence ratios with 95% confidence interval for each model. So this table shows the results from our analysis. So on the first column, we see the different body parts, so lower back and knee or leg. And I only presented these 2 body parts because these were the only models that were statistically significant. The second column refers to the ergonomic demands that were linked to these body parts. And the third and the fourth column refers to the average exposure that was experienced by the participants. And I split it across the participants who were grouped as non-cases versus cases. And the final column refers to the adjusted prevalence ratios with 95% confidence intervals. And I would like you to focus on the knee or leg pain and the ergonomic demand that says use knee as hammer more than once a minute. So the number 3.05 shows that the prevalence of knee or leg pain for if someone uses their knee as a hammer for more than once a minute is 3 times greater in the case group compared to the non-case group. In other words, if someone were to use their knee as a hammer for more than once a minute, and for every hour of that, the prevalence increases by 205%. Similarly, we saw that for every hour of unassisted lifting or lowering objects that are less than 23 kilos, the prevalence increases by 67%. And for every hour of unassisted lifting or lowering objects anywhere from 23 to 40 kilos, the prevalence increases by 49%. And this is all focusing on the knee or leg pain. So our study had several limitations. So first, there was a potential for recall bias, especially for questions that required participants to assess their pain level within the last 12 months. The results may also vary for other research groups based on the links that were made between the body parts and the ergonomic demands. So for our study, we reached a group consensus. We discussed what could be the most relevant body parts based on the ergonomic demands, and we reached a consensus. And it was also informed by links made in previous literature. The results may also vary based on the pain threshold value that was chosen for the symptomatic participants. So in our study, we said that anyone who's experiencing pain in a particular body part for more than 30 days is considered a case. Whereas, different groups, if they chose a different threshold value, that might cause different results. However, the threshold value that we picked is based on previous literature as well. So in conclusion, we created a comprehensive database of occupational requirements and ergonomic demands using self-reported data from skilled trades workers in Ontario. We identified associations between the ergonomic demands and MSD symptoms, which is the bodily pain. And we found that knee or leg pain, the prevalence increases by 205% for every hour of using the knee as a hammer for more than once a minute. It increases by 67% for every hour of unassisted lifting or lowering for objects weighing 23 kilos or less. And it increases by 49% for every hour of unassisted lifting or lowering weighing 23 to 40 kilos. The JEM that we created can help address the mismatches between job demands and worker capabilities, hence decreasing the risk of occupational injuries in the skilled trades industry. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
No one's your clap, but I'll clap. Thank you so much, Kumar, for that presentation. I'm going to give Kumar a chance now to take a sip of water, have a seat. Well done. Looking right now, there are some questions coming into the Q&A. I'll ask this one first, and I'll move on as we go.
Yeah.
Again, thank you so much. So in your presentation, you said you removed symptomatic participants.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on this, or do you know how many participants you removed from your analysis?
Yeah, for sure. So in previous literature, it shows that symptomatic participants, or participants who have been experiencing a lot of pain in particular body parts,
Yep.
they might overestimate the amount of exposure that they're facing in terms of the ergonomic demands that are linked to that body part. So that's one. But we also recognize that symptomatic workers may actually report the true value, which is the higher exposures compared to their asymptomatic workers, right? But however, to overcome this limitation, we had to remove the symptomatic participants in order to avoid the symptomatic reporting bias. Now, in terms of how much we removed, from what I remember, it was around 5 to 10% of the data set, but the same person will not be removed in every body part. So what I mean by that is, let's say, for one of the demands, right? So it's, let's say for standing, and that's linked with lower back and knee or leg. Let's say a participant is considered symptomatic for that particular demand. We would remove that participant's data from that combination, but we won't remove that person from another type of demand if that person isn't symptomatic.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. So it's not like we removed 5 to 10% of like 700 people like all the time. So it's it just varies depending on the combination of the ergonomic demand and the body parts that are most relevant to that demand. So it ranges around 5 to 10% depending on which ergonomic demand and body part you're looking at.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. Next question here. You mentioned there were a few ways to develop the job exposure matrix.
Yeah.
Self-reported, direct measures, and I think expert reported.
Yeah.
Why did you go with self-reported data?
Right. Yeah. So we understand that for direct, observation or direct measurements will be the most accurate. However, sometimes it can also be time-consuming, or it may not be the most cost-effective option. At the time when we started the study, using self-reported data was the most feasible. It was less time-consuming. It was more cost-effective. But we also understand its limitations, right? There's potential for recall bias and so on. However, right now in our institute, we are actually conducting a major project called DOSE, which stands for Database of Occupation-Specific Exposures, where we, as a research team, we go to different work sites to collect actual more objective measures of worker exposures. So things like muscle activity, postural data, and so on, in order to develop a more comprehensive database using direct measurements. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, question from the group here. Two of them. Can you elaborate more on which job or task, trade, or tool is being installed with a knee for more than once per hour? Or can you give examples of the jobs, trades, tasks where the knee is being used as a hammer?
Yeah, sure. I can actually go back to one of the slides. It'll be easier to explain from there.
Yep.
Let's see. I can just go back to the actual ergonomic demand slide where I had the entire job exposure matrix, just so that everyone can see. Okay.
And if I can full screen that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Is it on full screen?
Just give us that. Bam.
Okay, there we go. So using knee as a hammer for more than once a minute is more on the right side, if you can see. So for the most part, we see that automotive service technicians, as well as truck and bus technicians, actually use they have a higher level, or they use their knee as a hammer for more than once a minute compared to other job titles that we see in the exposure.
And that's the median exposure.
Those
so that's like 32 minutes within a day.
Median exposure, yeah.
Yeah, it's not like they're using it for an entire hour. But
correct.
Yeah, but your adjusted prevalence ratio is if they were to use it for an hour.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right, another question from the chat. Thank you so much for that. Was there any correlation in the pain scale rating based on respondent experience or years of work? So for example, did more experienced tradespersons rate pain levels lower as they're more used to the pain or have a higher tolerance versus the younger and less experienced who perceive pain levels to be higher?
Yeah, that's actually interesting because we didn't do that, the stratification based on the level of experience. So the question, the example was if a person has more experience,
do they perceive pain?
Higher? Yeah. So this might go back to slightly to the symptomatic workers side of things, right? So if they're experiencing more pain, they have a higher chance of rating higher exposure. But it'll be interesting to run the analysis based on stratification based on the number of years of experience.
Yeah.
But another thing to also note that I believe majority of our participants had 5 or fewer years of experience.
Okay.
So if majority of them fall within the same number of years of experience, the analysis might be biased towards that particular group of people. But it'll be interesting to run that. See. Yeah.
So short answer, not yet, but could be cool to run. I like it. All right, one question about the survey was I noticed language was not plain. For example, flexion and extension terms instead of bending up and down. Did you take the language into consideration on the education level and different NOCs such as supervisors, apprentice, etc.? So did you modify the survey based upon the participants? Yeah,
so the survey and the questions and the wording that we created were actually adapted from the Washington State Ergonomics checklist, which was made sure that someone like workers in different job titles would be able to comprehend what the questions or the demand actually refer to. And yeah, in terms of flexion and extension.
So you had to use those words, like, okay.
In order to keep it consistent with how, from the source that we adapted from.
Okay. All right. So it could be something to look into in terms of doing layman language, but all right. And then chronic pain definition, there's a question about this. Was chronic pain defined as more than 30 days of consecutive symptoms? If so maybe yes or no to that first.
Chronic pain, yeah. So when I say chronic pain, I was referring to the section of the question where they would rate the frequency of the pain that they're experiencing in the last 12 months. So the scale would go from anywhere from less than 24 hours all the way to ongoing or permanent. Now, in the analysis later on that I did, I would assign a person as a case if they're experiencing pain for 30 or more days. So that is represented as like, oh, they're experiencing chronic pain. But yeah, 30 or more days would be consecutive, yeah.
So now the next part of the question is, if so, why was 30 days considered chronic pain? Since according to the International Association for the Study of Pain, chronic pain was defined as more than 90 days.
Yeah, so for this, again, we used previous literature in order to inform on the scale that we were actually using. So this is based on the Nordic Musculoskeletal Questionnaire. Again, because we adapted directly from the questionnaire, we wanted to keep it consistent according to how it was named based on that, so that later on when we run our analysis and also make comparison to other literature, which has used Nordic Musculoskeletal Questionnaire, it'll be easier for us to do so and interpret what it would mean.
Yeah,
but
to compare.
Yeah, so I understand. But like later on, we can, if we develop like a different survey and we can have like an additional, like a category if it's more than 90 days or so, in order to get more stratification on like that's more than 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. But again, as we go longer and longer, there's also a potential for recall bias, people trying to remember what happened in the last 3 months, right, compared to the last 1 month, which is a bit easier to remember.
That's fair, yeah. Thank you for that. Another question, were any thermal stressors taken into consideration during the study? In other words, was cold weather or wearing layers of clothing that limit movement?
Not in the survey, no. We didn't have any questions specific to that because the ergonomic demand questions were all focused on the physical aspect of things, so there wasn't any environmental stressors or questions related to that. So, physical exposures, anything to do with like force or posture or the amount of time that's taken to do these tasks,
Yeah, so environmental stuff out of scope.
Yeah.
Understood. Next question. Given that MSDs are generally gradual onset injuries, why are 60% of participants in the working less than 5 years range? It seems like the statistics could be skewed to the lower, given that those with current pain were excluded from the study. Do you want me to read it again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can repeat it.
Yeah. So given that MSDs take time to happen, why are 60% of the participants working less than 5 years? It seems like the statistics could be skewed to the lower end, given that the ones who have pain currently were excluded from the study.
Right. So we didn't have control on who we were recruiting from in terms of the level of experience. So we would recruit anyone who's in the skilled trades sector. It just happened to be that in our data set, 60% of them had only 5 years or fewer experience. But I understand that it's a potential limitation, that because majority of our participants were within the 60%, were within 5 years or fewer in terms of job experience. So majority of the results might be biased towards that. But let's say if you were to conduct like an experimental study later on, right? If you were to recruit people specifically, from different level of employment or different length of employment, in order to understand the association between that and musculoskeletal pain, that might be interesting to look at. But because this is survey data, so this is a very cross-sectional data, so at a specific point in time, we can't control like the proportion of our participants in terms of their length of employment.
Yeah. And one thing I think I'd like to add too is like, even within 5 years, you can still get an onset of injuries and they would maybe like subside as well. potentially. But the question is definitely right in terms of like it might pinch the participant pool a little bit if the ones who are currently injured get cut out and the ones who don't even have any injuries just only started working.
Makes sense.
Another question in the chat, being mindful of time. Oh, we got plenty of time. Based on the last slide, please go to it.
Sure. Is it the key takeaways that you're referring to?
Well, we'll see. It says, am I correct that the prevalence of MSD symptoms was higher for lifting of lower weights, 69%, compared to higher weights, 49%?
Yeah.
If so, can you explain why this might be? Perhaps fewer jobs that require heavier lifting?
Yeah, so that's actually an interesting finding because we were expecting the other way around, right? Like we were expecting more prevalence because it's a heavier weight. I mean, there could be different reasons. One that I could think of right away is that maybe because if the object is a lot heavier, maybe there's a lower chance of someone actually doing unassisted lifting. And so they might be using some kind of tool, or maybe they might be doing team lifting. So that's why we probably didn't see a lot of cases in that sense. But people primarily might be lifting objects that are less than 23 kilos, but they might do that without any assistance. Hence, it might increase the risk of pain and injuries within the body parts that we were analyzing. That could be a reason.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So just the amount of the chance of people doing
the
that.
Chances, yeah.
Like if you go back to the table
yeah.
with it, like my question personally was for people lifting, so the very bottom one, unassisted lifting lowering of greater than 40 kgs, you have a PR prevalence ratio of 0.54.
Correct.
So are you less likely to get
Yeah, so that was one thing I didn't mention. So anything that's less than 1 might imply that there is a protective effect on pain, which, if you ask me why, my immediate answer is I don't know yet. Yep. We can definitely look more into that. Why is it that we're seeing a protective effect on certain associations, so between lower back pain and its demands, as well as for knee and leg pain, for carrying loads, as well as unassisted lifting or lowering greater than 40 kilos. But because a prevalence ratio of less than 1, it's always a bit challenging to interpret and to understand why is it causing a protective effect. Why is it not increasing the prevalence, right? So
we definitely want to be careful with saying and wording that, only because we don't want to say
Correct.
Hey, if people lift more than 40 kgs, they're less likely to get hurt.
So that's not the case. That's not the case. So we just need to understand, because there might be other factors at play that might be causing this lower prevalence ratio of less than 1.
Yeah, true. Awesome. And now one more question. I've got a couple more. You mentioned that you adapted 8 to 14 descriptors from ONET domains. Can you elaborate more on that?
For sure. So the ONET questionnaire, they had, I think, close to about 15 or more descriptors, or maybe 20 descriptors per domain that they had.
Yeah.
But the way we decided the range of 8 to 14 is based on a frequency-weighted approach. So what I mean by that is we first determine what are the top 20 skill traits that have the highest enrollment in Canada. So this is based on the National Apprenticeship Survey that was made in 2020. So based on those top 20 skill traits, we went back into the ONET database and we searched for these 20 traits, and we looked at the importance scores for each of the descriptors in each domain. And then after that, we ranked all of these descriptors based on what's the most important and what's the least important descriptor in each domain. And then we used a frequency-weighted approach, and we picked anywhere from 8 to 14 based on what's most feasible in terms of the length of the survey and what's most relevant for the questions that we want to answer. Yeah. Right. So obviously, we cannot include all of the descriptors because then the survey might be too long, and we wanted to keep the survey within 30 minutes in order for the participants to have enough time to respond to all of them, and without getting any mentally fatiguing because of because of the length of the survey being too long. Right. Yeah. So we had to just pick anywhere from 8 to 14.
I get that. All right. And what are you seeing for the future of this work?
For sure. So one of it is what I mentioned just now. So we are doing the DOSE project, so the database of occupation-specific exposures, where we're going to different work sites to get objective measures. And that will give us a more accurate understanding of the job exposures for various types of skill trades. And using that data, we can also run like a validation study where we could look at the correlation between the survey data that we collected versus these objective measures to see how well, now does the survey agree, the self-reported data agree with the objective measures that we get. And we can also use the DOSE project to, using that data set, we can also pinpoint where are the problems, the ergonomic problems that each of the different skill traits are actually facing in order to better inform targeted interventions that can help reduce the risk of occupational injuries in the skilled trades industry.
Thank you for that. It seems like right now